This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. This is the podcast where we bring you conversations with the world's most fascinating authors. Today, we dive into the golden age of Hollywood with journalist, producer, and film historian Nat Segaloff. His new book, Bogart and Huston, the lives, their adventures, and the classic movies they made together explores the legendary and combustible friendship between director John Huston and actor Humphrey Bogart. From the Maltese Falcon to the African Queen, their collaborations from 1941 to 1953 produced some of cinema's most enduring classics. Segaloff, author of more than 20 books on film and culture, takes us behind the scenes of these masterpieces and into the remarkable lives of the two men who made them. Nat, welcome to the Speaking of Writers
Thank you.
podcast.
I couldn't have written that better myself. And in fact, I think I did.
What first inspired you to write Bogart and Huston?
I went down a wrong street, quite literally. I was trying to write a book on the treasure of the Sierra Madre, which is probably one of the greatest 20 films ever made. And I hit a brick wall. I got about 40,000 words and realized I'd written everything about it that I could possibly write without starting to stare at my navel and exploring things like symbolism and, the shape of the clouds in the background. And I'm not into that kind of film analysis. So my agent, Lee Sobel, who I call my super agent, and I sat down on the phone and said, well, what can we do? And it was very simple. And that is, since Treasure of the Sierra Madre was a collaboration between Huston and Bogart, and they both enabled each other to make it, why not write a book about Huston and Bogart, who had conveniently made 6 films together, each of which was singular, and their relationship, which it turns out was very different than most people realize. And that 70,000 words later, that was the book.
These two were, look, larger than life personalities. How would you describe the friendship? Was it more collaboration, competition, or survival?
All of the above. They needed each other. Houston needed Bogart as the biggest and highest paid star in Hollywood at the time they began working together to enable him to get the financing for the movies he wanted to make. At the same time, Bogart knew after they'd done the Maltese Falcon together that Houston was the best director he would ever have. And so it was kind of a symbiotic relationship or codependent, depending on who was drunker at the time.
Every time they worked together, they seemed to create a classic. What was the secret to their chemistry on set?
It's hard to say what the secret of their chemistry on set was because Houston was so subtle and Bogart was so well directed himself that they must have had some kind of communication. But most directors would tell you the real secret of making a good movie is the casting. And Houston knew to cast Bogart in those roles where Bogart could actually play them. If you look at the other films that Bogart made over the years, those which didn't work, for example, The Oklahoma Kid, where he played a cowboy, and films like that, you'll know that maybe that was pushing the envelope somewhat in the wrong direction. But the chemistry they had together was very simple, that they were both professionals, they both knew and loved their craft, and they both liked a bit of the adventure.
Let's look at some of the films now. Let's start with the Maltese Falcon, their very first collaboration. Why does it still resonate, Nat, with audiences today?
Well, you might say that third time is the charm with the Maltese Falcon because it had been made twice before at Warner Brothers. And when John Huston's contract enabled him to direct as well as to write a film, the folks at Warner Brothers said, oh God, he's probably going to do some pretentious art film like most first-time directors want to do. But instead, Huston went back into the files and found this warhorse, dusted it off, and made it, surprisingly enough, just like the book, which the previous 2 versions hadn't done. And the book was strong enough, and of course, Bogart and all the casting straight out of the Warner Brothers contract list was strong enough that the Maltese Falcon became a hit, and that anointed everybody to keep on doing it. So the secret of the Maltese Falcon is tell the story the way the damn book writer wrote it and tell it with verve and style, and that is certainly what Huston was able to do.
You mentioned this earlier. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre is often cited as one of Huston's greatest films and Bogart's finest performances. What do you think made that partnership so successful?
It was mutually abusive in Treasure of the Sierra Madre, especially. the difference between the two men is profound. Humphrey Bogart, who was born into wealth in New York City and enjoyed a drawing room more than any other kind of environment, versus John Huston, who was born as a mountebank actor with his father and mother escaping from towns on fire. I mean, literally, they escaped on a wagon while the town burned. They were so different that Bogart liked himself to be in a drawing room, and Huston preferred to be anywhere else in the world. But they came together on Treasure in a strange confluence because, as Lauren Bacall said, you can be sure that if John makes a movie, it'll be the most uncomfortable place we can possibly be. And in fact, it was because they filmed in Mexico, they filmed in the desert of Yuma, Arizona, they filmed in terrible locations, and Bogart hated every moment of it. But Huston was loving it. He was the kind of person who could look at a cactus and say, that's probably a good place to sit down, or more likely to have one of the actors sit down. And they got along for the duration of the shoot, which was somewhat extended, by testing each other. Bogart wanted to get out of there, and I think that conferred a kind of an urgency upon his performance that made the film work. Is that too long an answer?
No, not at all. The African Queen, brutal conditions that movie was filmed under. How did Bogart and Huston's personalities clash or complement each other during that production?
Well, Lauren Bacall has been talking about this, but of course, Katharine Hepburn wrote a book about how they shot the African Queen. I think the secret seems to have been that Bogart and Huston never drank water. They only drank liquor, which is why they're the only two who ever stayed healthy. The whole other cast and crew had whatever you want to call the runs during the whole performance, and it almost hurt the film. But Huston and Bogart knew they were making something good. They knew they were making a film that was very different for both of them. Well, not so much for Huston because he loved weird locations, but Bogart really knew that the character of Charlie Allnut, the skipper of this little boat where he is trying to escape World War I, and instead, the woman that he takes with him, played by Katharine Hepburn, Rosie, compels him to go and try to destroy a German gunship which is blocking the lake. I made it sound more complicated than it was. It's really a story about two people who are in love but don't know it until the very end. And that's the sort of thing that Huston liked to do. He liked to create very, very dense characters and have fine actors portray them. And throughout the course of The African Queen, it's really a love story set against the background of war and a mission. So he's got several balls in the air at once. And that's the kind of thing Huston loved doing and was able to do well, and that Bogart realized that Huston was the only one who could juggle like that, and so they got along. But it was tense because the conditions were miserable. You're right. They filmed it on the Congo River.
Yeah.
Only some of the shots were done in a tank back in London, and they had to endure everything, including leeches, which is one of the famous scenes in The African Queen.
Of the six collaborations, do you have a personal favorite and why?
Oh, the Maltese Falcon.
Yeah.
I mean, then Treasure Sierra Madre, then The African Queen. But the joy of writing the book Bogart and Huston was I was able to watch all of these films over and over again and not have to explain to anybody why I was doing it. But I think the Maltese Falcon, like Casablanca, just sings. I mean, it's not a bad scene in there. There's not a bad line of dialogue. And it's shot in a way that you're always on Philip Marlowe's side. I'm sorry, Sam Spade's side. I'm confusing my
Spade, right?
Bogarts.
Yes.
Thank you. You're talking the big sleep all of a sudden. You're always on his side the way it's so cleverly shot. And I think it's nice to be in the shoes of somebody who's going to be a winner like Bogart. You know, when Bogart played a private detective, which was the first time in his main career he played a private detective, supposedly he got letters from guys in prison who complained that he turned against them and gone straight. So it's a pretty convincing performance, I think, is Sam Spade.
Both men led very colorful private lives, multiple marriages, wartime service, battles with studios. How did those off-screen experiences influence the films they made together?
Well, you know, people who've seen war never talk about it. They can say they've been in war, but the ones who've really seen battle, the worst kind of battle, will only discuss it with someone else who's seen battle. Now, Bogart was in World War I, Huston was in World War II, but neither one of them saw, well, how can I put this? Bogart didn't see battle because by the time he was old enough to enlist in World War I, the war was just about over. And so he was on a troop ship helping to bring people back. Supposedly he was wounded when a shell went off, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Huston, of course, was in the thick of battle, and he shot it in the Battle of San Pietro, which is one of the classic documentaries, which was suppressed for the longest time. We actually see soldiers being shot and killed on camera. Huston also made a film called Let There Be Light about returning veterans who had been psychologically damaged during the war and how many of them were rehabilitated. But Huston was in it, in the thick of it, and he, although he was quite affected by it, also was able to keep objective because he was with the camera. But the war affected both of them simply because war can't help but affect them. They had to take a stand. They loved America, but at the same time, they knew that this was a turning point, that if America gave in, who knows what would have happened afterwards. I mean, it's kind of the crossroads we're in now.
You write about how their friendship endured through fights, alcohol, Hollywood moguls, and the leeches, to the point you made earlier. What do you think ultimately kept them bonded?
I think it was codependency that kept Bogart and Huston bonded. Each of them knew the other was the best thing they ever had. To my research, they didn't spend a lot of time together between the times they were making movies. I mean, there were parties here and there, but nothing, they weren't going around the town on a pub crawl or anything. I think they came together for a specific purpose, and that was to make a movie they both agreed to make and that they both knew they could do well. And that dignifies their relationship. They didn't fool around. They got right down to business, and they were both complete professionals. Bogart, I suspect, rather more than Huston.
Mm. How did Jack Warner and the studio system affect their collaborations?
It always helps. And I think Hitler wrote this, or maybe it was Nietzsche, to help have a common enemy that unites the people. And the common enemy at the Warner Brothers lot was Jack L. Warner, who was himself, well, I think Joan Crawford said moguls like him should be fed out of a trough if you have them over for dinner. He may have been crude and he may have been a bad singer and told lousy jokes, but he knew movies. He knew what movies to make, and he really had the people's touch somehow. And that was something that was very encouraging if you were trying to get a budget out of him. Now, being a person who was a bit difficult to get along with, Bogart, who could also be difficult to get along with, was on suspension a number of times because he turned down films that Warner had offered him. Huston, as a writer at the time, was also offered films, and he was able to work on them. But Huston was so gifted that when he worked on a film, such as Sergeant York or High Sierra, it was his rewrite of those scripts that made the films producible. And so he was the Christ, if you will, at Warner Brothers. And so when Huston, because of a contract codicil, wanted to be a director, the Warner Brothers, that is the Jack Warner, and production chief Hal Wallace said, sure, go ahead. And as I said before, they were surprised when it turned into a huge moneymaker, the Maltese Falcon. So what can I say? Both Bogart and Huston were professionals, but they knew where their golden eggs were buried.
Now, let's talk broader legacy here. What do Bogart and Huston's films together tell us about the golden age of Hollywood?
Well, we're talking about the star system when we discuss the films of Bogart and Huston. We're talking about the golden age of Hollywood, which is not here and will never be here again. Those were the days when the film companies could own theaters, produce films, and distribute films. This was before the consent decree divorced them from each other. And so you knew if you made a film how much it would cost. You knew roughly how much it was going to gross in theaters, and then you knew how much revenue you'd get from the theaters. So you could describe an entire season's output and know roughly what you were going to make from it. You can't do that anymore. You haven't been able to for decades. And there are some people who wish that the old system was back. Well, the old system was pretty much what television used to be before cable came along. If you were a network, you couldn't own your shows, but you could produce them, and you knew how much they were going to cost and how much they were going to do in terms of ratings. So if you're a vertical monopoly, you have much more assurance, and you're able to take risks. And that's the long answer to this diatribe I've been giving you. If you know you're going to make money, then you can afford to take risks. I mean, Dory Sherry at MGM said it's good for the industry to make certain kinds of films. Jack Warner wanted to make Treasure Sierra Madre. He knew it wasn't going to make a fortune, but he said it's a good film for us to make. And he did. And when he finally saw the rough cut, he sent telegrams to all of his sales managers saying, I've simply seen the best film we've ever made. It's going to win every award. We should get behind it. And in fact, it did.
How do you hope modern audiences, especially younger film fans, will approach these classics today?
I don't want to sound like a cynic in asking how new audiences are going to approach these old films. You'd like to think that classic films, like a diamond, are always going to stay in style. But in fact, it takes a lot to get people to watch a black and white movie.
Yeah.
Even on Turner Classic Movies, they're smart and they program the color movies during the prime viewing hours. They keep the black and white movies for the early or late evenings. And that's a secret I don't think people have talked about. Just because a film is a classic doesn't mean that people are going to want to see it. There's what did Mark Twain said, a great book is a book you want to have read, but you don't want to read. Several people may extol these films, but you got to sit someone down to see them. I remember when I was just a pod, I couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. Our family lived in Washington, D.C., and the WTTG independent station, was Metro Media in those days, had an 8 o'clock p.m. movie every Thursday called Movie Greats. One night, my mother said, Nat, you're going to sit down in front of the television and you're going to watch this movie and you're going to enjoy it. Well, the movie was Casablanca, and she was right on all counts.
Yeah.
But unless somebody had shown me that movie and shown me the seat, I might not have ever tuned into Casablanca. It was one
Yeah.
of the films that made me a film fan, but also I knew that it had to be great because it was on TV and one of my parents wanted me to see it. And I
Yeah.
think you need that kind of personal contact. You can't just put up an ad saying, oh, come and see Treasure Sierra Madre. You have to say someone, a friend say, let's go see Treasure Sierra Madre. And you can enfranchise them that way.
Especially in this TikTok ADD world we live in right now, and the short clips.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine watching Lawrence of Arabia on something, the size of a pack of cigarettes?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, you brought back memories growing up in New York and Channel 9 in New York, the Saturday night
Oh
movies.
yeah.
Yeah, my dad was the same. He was a big movie buff, so he made me sit down and watch a lot of those, and these too.
Yeah, yeah. I'll tell you on the other side of it. My father once did the same thing to me. He said, "Sit down and watch this movie." Then he went to bed. The movie was The Thing, and it scared the piss out of me. So I have that memory to balance Casablanca.
Yes. If Bogart and Houston were alive today, what kind of movie do you think they'd make in this world together in 2025?
That's one of those speculative questions I wish I had a ready answer for. Well, I think Bogart would probably be making a Tarantino film. Simply
Yes.
because that was the kind of screen image he had. Now we're talking if he was still in his 40s or 30s. As far as Houston, well, Houston changed his style so many times over the years. He outlived Bogart by decades. His last film was The Dead, probably the most pensive film he ever produced. But he also did Annie. He did Escape to Victory. He did The Man Who Would Be King. I mean, you couldn't hold him down. So I assume he would still be working and alternating successes with failures, which is what he did throughout most of his career. But I think it's Bogart who will still, I think, would still capture the imagination of the public because he was a tough guy, a cynical character in a cynical era, and yet underneath a real romantic.
What's next for you in your writing?
I've just about finished a book on another collaboration between a famous director and a famous actor. Superstition keeps me from saying what it is, but I'm a couple of weeks away from hitting the mark when I can send it out to publishers. And the other book I have coming out, which fortunately I don't have next to me, so I can't hold it up as a plug, but Leonard Maltin, the famous film critic, and I
Oh,
wrote a
yeah.
book called Every Movie is a Miracle, and it's coming out in a few days from Sticking Place Books. Leonard and I have known each other for 50 years, and we finally agreed to sit down and write a colloquy. So we discuss movies. It's mostly about him because he's the real movie maven. But I also put in a couple of my stories, and it's just a conversation between us. And I must say, it was a lot of fun to do. And every movie is a miracle, which is his expression. Is I think it'd be fun to read. So I'm coasting on Bogart in Houston. I've got the Malton book coming out. In January, I'm republishing my first book, which was the biography of William Friedkin, who had made The Exorcist and The French Connection and
Yeah.
Sorcerer. And he passed away 2 years ago. I've had so many requests for the book, and you can't find it anywhere, that I'm bringing that out again. And that's going to come from Bear Manor Media. So I always have something in the chute because, like a shark, I have to keep writing or I die.
He is busy. I haven't heard Leonard Maltin's name in a long time, so looking forward to that one as well. But
Good.
you can enjoy this one now. Nat Segaloff's new book. It's Bogart and Houston, Their Lives, Their Adventures, and the Classic Movies They Made Together. There it is available everywhere books are sold. Thank you for joining me, Nat.
Steve, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you and your group. And everybody go out and read something, please.
Yes. And this has been Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.